I'm wondering, do you consider yourself that? Do you consider yourself a trauma
Yeah.
therapist? Is that what you do in the work of therapy?
Yeah. Um, I think that's a really loaded question because I think like what comes up for me when I hear like, do you consider yourself a trauma therapist? Are all of the parts of me that's like, how could you consider yourself a trauma
Mm,
therapist? Like, um, you're not like maybe you've taken some certificates in trauma narrative training, but it's like, how do you know what trauma is? And
mm,
so I think that it's hard for me to say like, yes, I'm a trauma therapist, but I think that ultimately how I would describe myself as a therapist is someone who really wants to deeply connect with people and as much as I can be a witness to the experiences that they've had in their life
mm,
and bring in compassion and curiosity and unconditional positive regard. And if that is something that, if trauma is something that comes up in the midst of our therapy, which I would say the majority of it is, then that's great. But I guess I kind of try to shy away from the definition of like, what type of therapist am I? Because I
mm,
think people can also hear the word trauma and be like, oh, I don't have that in my life. I
mm,
haven't experienced trauma. That trauma looks like ABC, and that's, something that's happened to someone else. But my experience has been normal or not too bad. Like maybe I'm just
mm,
struggling a little bit with my thoughts or something. And so I
mm,
don't want to define that for people and have their judgment come up for them in the midst of
mm,
that definition too.
mm. That makes so much sense to me. Yeah.
Mm,
I'd love to hear like what when I think about you as a therapist, just what you love about therapy. What do
yeah,
you I want to kind of get after what do you
yeah,
do? But I
yeah,
love just asking therapists, what do you love about the work that you
yeah.
do?
I think I love being with people in a deep way. I think like it's been historically hard for me to be with people in a surfacey way, and so therapy has been kind of like my secret cheat code into getting into the depths of conversations with people, and maybe I would imagine most people come into therapy with the understanding that there's going to be some depth in it, and so kind of allows us to get into that part of the relationship earlier on than maybe most relationships that we get to be a part of in our life. I think that I learn so much from my clients. I ultimately think that all of us have parts of each other. Um, and so when I get to walk someone through the experiences that they've faced and see the parts of them that are there, like I get to find parts of myself too,
Mhm.
and vice versa. Um, and ultimately, there's something very freeing about sitting with someone and holding compassion and curiosity for their experience in a way that feels very bidirectional,
Mm,
where when I can hold compassion and curiosity for someone else's experience, that compassion and curiosity is also held for mine, and not in the way of like self disclosure or anything, but just in the way of like sitting in a space where there is compassion and curiosity for both of us to be.
mm. So when I hear that, I think, oh, counseling is two ways. You hear about it all the
Yeah,
time being maybe
yeah,
a one-way relationship, and of course the
yeah.
focus is so greatly on this one person who's come in and
Mm-hmm.
who is desiring help.
Yeah,
It sounds like maybe people who sit with you are surprised at how 3D you are, that
yeah.
they are sitting with a real person too
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of that. It is two-way. It is
Oh, it
two
too.
people.
Yeah, it is definitely two ways. Oftentimes I'll come away I mean, I would imagine the majority of my clients don't really know anything that's going on in my life. But the work that we do is deeply impactful to me and to my personal life and to my relationship with God and to my relationship with other people. Um, every single one of my clients impacts me deeply.
Mm.
Um, and I feel so honored and so privileged to be given the chance to sit with them in that way.
Yeah, something you said earlier, people hearing the word trauma
Mm,
and thinking maybe that counts them out, or I don't have
mm-hmm.
that. That's not
Yeah.
my experience. Makes me wonder who has trauma.
Mm, yeah. Like, what is trauma?
Yeah, I'm thinking this. I'm thinking there's I hear this pretty frequently where people will say maybe this critique. It seems like everyone is talking about their trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe that's an exaggeration, or that I've actually heard it said this way. Not everyone has trauma, right? Why are these kids? Why is Gen Z? Why am I hearing so many adults talk about their traumas? Isn't that maybe a false statement or untrue or an exaggeration? They're almost saying like, is this a pop psychology word that has been overused? I think is the question they're asking.
You think, when you think of the question they're asking, like, what do you think the fear is behind, like, owning that?
That's such a therapist question to ask. I think they're asking, what is trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think they maybe have a similar experience that you just said. Isn't trauma this super extreme thing that has only happened to very few people? I think that's a belief they're holding.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, why is everyone talking about it? Surely they're not these people who have almost died or had something terrible, life-threatening, or sexually occurring to them as a child. I think they think of these really extreme examples and go, almost no one has that, so why is everyone talking about their traumas?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of self-judgment in that view. And what I mean by that is that other people, like a big experience, or what we would imagine a big experience to be, is what trauma is. And in that, they're separating themselves from their experience because it's not enough. And there's a self-judgment in that. And if we define trauma as this big experience, or what people would say is like, that is definitely traumatic, then we're actually saying like, your experience, it doesn't count. And I think that when you hear people say like, oh, that's not traumatic, like those people probably have a lot of trauma that they can't be with themselves, which is why they can't allow other people to be with their trauma. So I think it comes from a space of self-judgment. I mean,
it's a protective question.
Yeah, it's a really protective question. And I think that ultimately, like, what is trauma? Like, it's an overwhelming or distressing experience. And I think that, I mean, in order to have a good definition of trauma, like a holistic definition of trauma, I think we have to think about the impact that it has on our mind, our body, and our spirit. And so an overwhelming or distressing experience, which can be any number of experiences, in our body or in our mind, causes excessive rumination, flashbacks, emotional dysregulation, self-judgment. In our body, it shows up as like an imprint on our nervous system, like hyperarousal, hypoarousal, health issues, disconnection from your body. And I think in our spirit, ultimately, like trauma has the most effect, and that's a disconnection from other people and from ourself and from our spirit, from God, from life, and a loss of trust in those things. And we need connection as human beings. And so I think when we can name trauma as an overwhelming or a distressing experience, we can kind of walk it back from being something that's like this absolutely horrible thing that everyone would look in on and be like, that's a traumatic experience. And we can start to be with, you know, our own experience of like, this was something that was distressing for me. This was something that was overwhelming for me.
I'm thinking it's about that person's experience. It's their interpretation of what happened.
Yeah.
And we don't get to control what that is.
Yeah.
Because every person is going to experience a single event, whatever that event is, whether that was a comment somebody made to you in the past or something as big as a car accident.
Totally.
For that person could show up in a distressing way that's different than another person.
Yeah. Everybody has different levels of sensitivities too. So yeah, I think that it can show up differently I think oftentimes in medicine and in psychology and science and many different spaces, we want to standardize things
Mm.
and say, this is what this is for everyone and this is what isn't for everyone. I mean, I think you look at the medical model, and we're seeing a lot now that like we really can't standardize healthcare for everyone as much as we would like to be able to say like these symptoms mean this. Like, it's just not really possible because every one of us works very differently from each other. And so I think if we take a perspective of like something that might not be overwhelming for me could definitely be overwhelming for someone else, we can have more grace for that other person, and we can have more grace for ourselves so that we don't use our mind to separate us from an overwhelming or distressing experience by being like, oh, this wasn't enough, so I shouldn't like hold grace for myself.
I'm thinking still of the critiques.
Mm-hmm.
I heard recently someone say, this was a comment specifically about spiritual trauma, and specifically the term church hurt. Someone say, why are we using the word church hurt? And specifically what they went on to say is, to say, maybe this is an overused term, when someone has had an experience with a coach and they're young, they don't have sports hurt, but everyone who has a bad experience, this is literally how it was said. So what's with all the church hurt that everyone's talking about? Almost as if to say, can we stop using that term?
I mean, when you say that, like the thing that kind of comes up for me is like church hurt is, I mean, when you're hurt at a spiritual level, like that affects everything. That affects your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your God, your relationship or trust in life in general, the connection that you feel to people around you. And I think many people would consider or would hope that church would be a safe space for them. It's where they could show up as their self, because I think that's what many churches would desire to be. But then when that space becomes harmful, that really impacts a person on a variety of levels, different from just an athletic coach. Because I don't imagine, I mean, maybe some people think of their like sports team or their athletic team as like a space where they can show up as themselves, but it's not in the same way as like a church, I would imagine.
I think I've sat with people where my response on some level would be, oh, sports hurt, coach hurt, absolutely exists. That those formative experiences are still terrible.
Definitely.
But what you're saying, I think I also resonate with, is there something uniquely destructive about spiritual trauma?
Yeah.
When something painful or a threat towards your well-being or existence or a threat towards your ability to be a part of a community, when that's associated with God, is there something uniquely more destructive about that?
Yeah, because when that's associated with God, that's like a judgment that comes down. Like, I think we all have, we already have a difficult time with our own self-judgment. And when you start to say, like, this is a church that's based around God's love, and then there's hurt that comes from that, like that gets projected onto God. That's the way that God views me. And so I think that's a deeply wounding place. And I mean, I agree with you. Like, I think that someone's coach, like if someone really looks up to their coach or their mentor or their team, and they feel like there's a camaraderie there, then that also can be deeply hurtful too. Like, on an aside, when we're talking about trauma, one of the things that I've kind of thought about in the past is, like, can we replace the word trauma? And this is like, I think this can go, like, this could be kind of seen as maybe a little bit controversial, but can we replace the word trauma with sin? Can we imagine that trauma is really just the perpetuation of sin, in the way that sin is very harmful? And it's really our like, all of us hold darkness and light. And when we have been sinned against, that can then take up space in our body as trauma. And we, without becoming aware of that, can then perpetuate that darkness.
Mm.
And so I think spiritual harm is like a powerful way for that to happen.
Mm. Because what happens? What happens
Yeah,
when that harm's given or when someone experiences?
because that person becomes disconnected from their body and from their connection to self and from their connection to other people. And they become fragmented in their mind. And if there is not an awareness of that taking place, that's where darkness can really come in. And I think when we're disconnected from ourselves, from our body, and from other people, we don't have the awareness of how darkness like can flow through in those areas. I think when we think about betrayal, there's a lot of darkness in betrayal, but what did that person who betrayed think about themselves before they betrayed? How were they unaware to the betrayals that have happened in their life that potentially caused them to believe things about themselves that led them to that decision? So like, how does trauma affect the body? Like, I mean, I think let's think about the physical body. When we are disconnected from our body and we're in our mind, because that's what happens when we disconnect from our body, is the sensations that are happening to our body on a daily basis. Maybe we don't feel them or we're not with them because we're in our mind. And there's also a great push to kind of be like, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. I think that we can't be present. And in the lack of presence, not only to like our physical world and to our body, we can believe any number of things about ourselves because we're no longer attached to the thing that is giving us information about our physical world. And so the narratives that we create with our mind become reality. And I think that, I mean, Christ was very clear about the fact that he is the body. And so when we disconnect from the body, I think in many ways we disconnect from him. Like he's with our body, he's with our emotions, he's with the sensations that come. And when we're in our minds, when we're in our knowledge, we're creating any number of possibilities that we want to believe without actually consulting the thing that is giving us that information.
Do you have any examples? What would it look like for someone to go through a traumatic experience that leads to bodily disconnection?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of this is an eating disorder. Someone goes through an experience in life that is traumatic in any number of ways, and they feel as though they can't bear the pain that they hold in their body. And obviously, this doesn't happen on a conscious level most times. And they feel a desire or a need to control so that they can feel in control of their lives. So they start to control their food intake, or they start to control in a way where they're like going towards food. And that's a very disassociated space because either you're hungry and you're ignoring that hunger, or you're full and you're ignoring that fullness. And so you're in a disassociated space, and now you can't really be with what your body's experiencing because you're in control with your mind. And I think oftentimes that disassociation can lead to a lack of empathy for your body and what it's experiencing. When you're experiencing a traumatic situation, like there are a lot of sensations that happen in your body. There's fear. And I think that fear, if we're going to kind of expand like what that could feel like in the body, that can feel like a shutting down or a closing off. And if your kind of mind focus or your mind awareness is on this experience of how much food can I eat or how much like food can I not eat, like you're not with the experience of this fear that's happening in your body, which makes so much sense. Why would you want to be with an experience of fear?
That person through experience has learned how not to trust their body, or not
Yeah.
to how to get out of their body.
Yeah.
And eating disorder is just a way that that is a pathway, or somehow has managed to
Yeah.
give them that sense of control.
Yeah, we can have so much compassion for people who are so afraid or so in need of control that they start to control the way that they take care of their body, being like nourishment. I think even, I mean, the majority of us, I would say, like, probably don't like stretch or be with our bodies in the way that we're like, what feels good? Especially like if we come from a religious background, I think, because there's kind of a fear of the body in a way. And so I think that disassociation in our culture is actually very widely accepted. And that's why we see a lot of substance abuse and eating disorders and cutting and things that are destructive to the body. Because we don't have any empathy for it. We want to get away from it.
Yeah, that's making me think of maybe some spiritual categories that have been amplified that might collude with this idea that the body is bad. I think I have heard that message. I think I have multiple thoughts coming up, but let's just take one. One is this idea of the flesh, that maybe your body is bad and that you should distrust it because it will mislead you. I'm thinking of the passage of not following your heart because it's deceitful above all things. And even maybe some of my early training in biblical counseling, even telling you that emotions are inherently deceitful. Are these ideas that
totally
have led to some of this?
Definitely. I mean, I think like when I first started my own personal therapy, there was a great sense of, I would say, pride and arrogance that I had in my ability to kind of discount my emotions as being deceptive and being like, oh yeah, I don't need to, like, if I'm angry, like, that's sinful. If I'm sad, I'm not grateful for the things that are in my life. If I'm irritated, like, that is me just being sinful, being with my body. But I think, I mean, I've thought about this a lot. Like when you go back to the Genesis, to the beginning of time in Genesis, when Adam and Eve are in the garden, and God says, you can eat any fruit here, just don't eat of the tree of good and the knowledge of good and evil, right? And they were okay with their bodies, right? We had nothing that tells us that Adam and Eve were ashamed of their bodies in any way at that point in time. They were with their body. They were with God in their body. And then Eve eats the tree of good and evil, of knowledge of good and evil, and she becomes aware in her mind of evil. And then the first thing that happens is the shame of body. Let me cover my body up. I think that covering is what we do when we disassociate. We cover our body up and we go into our mind. And we rationalize and we create narratives for what life means. But again, like, how can we really know what reality is if we're cutting off the very thing that gives us information? We can believe anything in those spaces then.
So when you say that it's giving us information, you approach the body and emotions and these sensations, the experience of the body, how with your clients?
I approach it with a lot of curiosity and compassion. What is your body telling you? What emotions do you feel in your body? Can we be with those emotions? Can we not create a narrative around what those emotions mean or what decision you need to make because you have those emotions? Can we just be with the emotion? I think about Jesus and Lazarus and how when Lazarus died, Jesus went to Lazarus's family and stayed with them for 3 days before he raised Lazarus to life again. And in those 3 days, he wasn't like, guys, don't be sad. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to raise Lazarus to life again. He was with their emotion. He was grieving himself. He didn't have a fear of what he was feeling, even though he knew what was going to occur. And I think that is a testament to how we can be with our emotion without having to make some big decision or do something with it, because we always want to move with emotion. But can we just be with ourselves, and in being with ourselves, be with the God who created us, who created those emotions, who's a very emotional God.
So Jesus demonstrates emotion
Mm-hmm.
and presence and embodiedness
Yeah.
in a way that tells us to pay attention, that tells us it's okay to experience those things, maybe important to experience those things.
Yeah. I mean, again, like think of Mary and Martha. That Mary was sitting with Christ and was being with what is, and Martha was in the kitchen, being with what would be, working hard for what would be, and moving with her emotion instead of sitting with it. And Christ asked for us to sit with our emotion and to be with him in it. And if we can imagine that Christ is present in us, then when we are present with ourselves, we're in communion with him.
I'm thinking about how scary that seems
Oh, that's
to people,
terrifying.
being with your emotion.
Yeah.
Can you sit here and experience
Yeah.
your emotion? I'm wondering how you help people come to the present as a therapist.
I hope that, I mean, my whole hope when I sit with people is that we can be with whatever is, and that my curiosity in what is going on with them and the compassion that I have for them, and like, let's be clear, that compassion does not come from me, it comes through me, is something that can allow them to be with their emotion in a way that's not judgmental and that is present. It makes me think about the disciples in the boat in the storm. Christ was in the boat. He was in the berth of the boat. And they kept going down and being like, the storm is going to kill us. The storm is going to kill us. Like, help us. But Christ knew that he could calm the storm at any time. And I think that our bodies are the boat in that situation. And when we can trust that things will be calm when they become calm, and that we're protected and that we're safe and that Christ is with us, regardless of what that looks like. When we can be with our emotions in a way where we're not afraid of them, or where we feel like we have to do something right then, do something to stop the emotion. But when we can just be with it, that's when we can be in communion with ourselves and with Christ and with our emotions in a peaceful way.
It's a beautiful vision. I'm thinking some things we said are people disconnect from their bodies as a result of traumatic events or trauma in a way to protect themselves. But also there's maybe some ideas in ourselves or in the culture, in the church, that encourage us to be away from our bodies, to disconnect from them. It makes me wonder, how in therapy do you help people reconnect to their bodies?
Yeah. I think, again, I try and help people reconnect through curiosity. Because if we can be curious, then we can be in a space of playfulness, where we don't have to take everything so seriously. And what I mean by seriously is so judgmentally. I think curiosity, the opposite of curiosity would be judgment. Because judgment is such a rigid thing, and curiosity is such a free-flowing thing. And so my hope would be that when I sit down with a client and there's a sense of safety in the room, and almost like we can kind of be like, this is a playground for emotion. We can experience any emotion that we want to in here, and it's safe, and there are going to be boundaries. you don't have to worry about that. Like, I'm going to hold this container for us. Then we can experience emotion in a way that doesn't scare us or make us become more self-judgmental of what we're experiencing, but we can just notice, be like, oh, there's some anger coming in here. But what does that anger tell us? What does that anger feel like in your body? Where do you think that anger comes from? We can become more curious about what is behind the emotion instead of stopping at the emotion and being like, I shouldn't feel anger, or anger is bad. We can hold space for it and be like, let's explore this anger. This anger is worthy of exploration. And we can hold compassion for this anger. And I can love you in the midst of your anger. And that's a life-changing experience for both people in the room, because I have anger too. And if I can hold compassion for someone else's anger, then I can hold compassion for my own.
I'm thinking how funny it is to maybe be this big radical thing to notice with someone, to invite them to notice themselves. It's making me think, oh, we have a lot of judgment for ourselves.
Oh, so much judgment. We have an eternal amount of judgment for ourselves. We have judgment for our bodies experiencing that emotion too. And again, that's a way that we disconnect from our body. And we can kind of create any number of narratives around why we don't like our body, whether that be because we don't like the way we feel in it, we don't like the way we look in it. And I think that the self-judgment starts to cloud our view of how amazing our bodies are and how amazingly they were created. And when we disconnect from them, we can hold them out in front of us and look at them in a way that's self-critical. But if we can experience what it feels like to hold compassion and curiosity for an emotion and the way that it shows up in our body, and then take really good care to notice that, we can find a form of presence that we weren't able to find previous to that experience, I think. That we judge our bodies when we can't be with our emotion in an accepting way, because it's our bodies that hold that emotion. And if we can hold curiosity for the emotion and how it shows up in our body, then we can come into a space where we have more curiosity around what is taking place within us without having to jump into our mind and create a narrative around what's happening. We can actually be with what's happening.
I imagine that when people are given the space to be curious, when they sit with you, and you all of a sudden are really curious, or you're giving permission for them to notice what's happening in their body, I imagine people find things they haven't found before.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that they find is that they have so much more access to what's happening to them, and so much more, I want to say, like, intuition than they would have originally thought. Because, like I said, the mind is something that creates narratives, but the body is something that's actively doing the work to translate the stimuli that we're receiving on a daily basis. So when we have a desire to disconnect from our body and become disassociated from it, we're disconnected from the intuition of what's actually happening for us. When I'm with my clients, when I'm first with my clients, one of the thoughts that's kind of going through my head is, like, can I get this person to tell me some stories from their life?
Can you tell me just about the value of story in your therapy?
Yeah, I think story is really important because all of us are telling stories about ourselves and each other all the time, every day. And so to ask someone or to kind of prompt them to tell me a few stories about themselves gives me a way in to the way that they view themselves and the way they view other people around them and the way that they view their world. Stories are are a space that we inhabit every day, and in many times, like many moments of every day. And so it's important to me to be able to enter into that space with someone and be curious about, like, what are the stories that you tell yourself? What are the stories that have happened to you? What are the stories that really you find yourself ruminating on or revisiting in your life? This could be a story that happened when you were a child. This could be a story that happened yesterday. Like, let's explore some of these stories that you have, and really, instead of just tell them to ourselves, like, feel them in our bodies, and hold compassion for the person who is experiencing these stories, whether it's you or someone else. I guess the only other thing I'll say about story is that, like, we have many stories being told to us too. Stories on a political level, stories on a racial level, stories from a family level, and then the stories that we create for ourselves. And I think it's really important to start to engage these stories so that they're not just being told to us, but that we're also experiencing ourselves and other people in the midst of them. Because it's very easy to be told a story and to just believe it if you don't engage with it. And amongst stories, there's naming and identifying. And I think naming can be a very powerful thing, because when you're named as something, you can create your own identity around it. And so when we're told stories that name other people as certain things or name ourselves as things, I think we need to be very intentional around sitting with what that means for us or what that means for someone else, and not just taking on that name. I think we look at many stories in the Bible highlight the importance of naming, how God renamed people after they experienced something. There's an identity formation that happens there, and the world tries to name us many things. And I think it's important for us to question that naming.
So there's a retaking of identity that happens when we can tell stories?
Yeah. I think there's a retaking that happens when we can retell stories. And there's also, like, if we can put ourselves into the story and experience in our body the way that the story occurred to us, we can take back the power of the naming that has happened in the midst of that story for us.
It makes me want, again, maybe an example.
Yeah, let me use an example. From, I think, many women's lives, including my own, is the naming of, like, you're being dramatic. When you are called dramatic, or maybe not even called explicitly dramatic, but implicitly feel like you're dramatic, you then start to discredit your own emotion, because you're like, oh, I'm just being dramatic. The emotion that I'm feeling right now, it's just drama. I'm just trying to create drama. Like, it doesn't mean anything. And I think when we can go back into the stories where we're called dramatic, and maybe for some of my clients realize, like, oh, I'm a very sensitive individual that feels things on a deeper level, and my emotion was something dangerous to the people that were calling me dramatic, maybe because they couldn't experience their own emotion, because they had self-judgment for their own emotion. And so, of course, they had judgment for my emotion. That will then decrease my sensitivity, because anytime I feel something, I'm like, oh, it's just drama. I'm just being dramatic. When we can enter back into that story and recognize, like, oh, the judgment that other people held towards themselves was actually projected onto me, and then I took in that judgment for myself. And now I name myself as dramatic. I can't be with my sensitivity. I can't be with the emotions that arise in the midst of experiences, I can't recognize that sensitivity to emotion actually connects me to the world, because it's something that makes me see things in a way that maybe, people who are less sensitive can't see. I think that naming can really harm the power and the talent and the creativity and the curiosity that an individual holds when they name themselves as something like that. For men, I think oftentimes there's a very great push to not be emotional, to not be dramatic. And in that naming of like, oh, a man is an unemotional thing or an unemotional being, they can't experience their own sensitivity. They can't experience their own emotion around a circumstance. And so they have to, I've seen in a few of my clients, inhabit the world in a very like black and white, monotonous space, because they're told their sensitivity is wrong, which is disconnecting them from the very thing that allows them to connect to the world. And so that naming can be very destructive.
So retelling those stories gives what back to that person? Has given them what?
Retelling the stories gives them an awareness of the things that they experienced, especially retelling those stories in a space where there is curiosity and compassion, where they can take back their true self, their created self, and recognize that darkness and judgment wanted to disconnect them from that self, their body, their emotion, the thing that brings them life.
And what would you say to someone who feels nervous about entering into this work or starting therapy?
I would say that that's a very appropriate response. Therapy is a really scary thing. You're like entering a room or coming into an online platform where there's a sense of like, this is going to be hard, regardless of what you're coming in to do, because you're going to be asked questions or sat with in a way that exposes parts of yourself that maybe you don't want to expose, or maybe you feel a lot of shame around. And so I think for people coming into therapy that either haven't had the experience of therapy or have had the experience of feeling uncomfortable in the midst of depth, I would really want them to know, like, there's no need to rush into those spaces of shame or discomfort. We can really just be with each other as two people that live on the same earth and are in the same room together. And that I'm going to really hold a lot of curiosity for what your experience of living on this earth is like. And there's no right or wrong experience to have. And that I'm really excited to journey with you in kind of exploring what that experience is, and looking into the parts of self that feel really scary. And I'm going to try as much as I can to create a space that feels really safe and feels very welcoming every time you come in. And I don't have an agenda when it comes to therapy. I'm not going to sit down with you and say, like, this is where we need to get to, but that, like, we're two explorers together that, like I said, are on the same path in life, and in the way that we've journeyed into this room together, and that I'm really excited to see what comes of that.